Okay. So it begins again. And hopefully, even though the sound is going to sound like crap because it's coming through my microphone, through my computer speakers, at least you're hearing something. Okay. Alrighty. So I guess we'll try this, and if I find a better way to do it, hopefully maybe by tomorrow, I'm going to try and do this again tomorrow night, and if I can find a better way to do it by then, hopefully it will all be fixed. So, God, this is a long and arduous journey to get to this. Okay. And yay, doesn't that look like crap? Yay. Ugh. I love and hate this. Okay. Okay. Now I'm just getting reset up. Okay. Alrighty. I don't even know why I have my headphones in my ears. They're not hooked up to anything. Sure. Okay. We'll try this one more time. Okay. And then we go back in here. And we'll try this again. Okay. And remove that, please. That go away. Thank you. Okay. Alrighty. Oh, hello, Trevor. Hi. This is take number 3 trying to get this stream to work. And yeah, so the master at work is bumbling so bad because she doesn't understand how to stream through Google Hangouts because it's confusing. Okay. Okay. Well, for right now, this be the best we can get. Okay. 3 is a charm. Hi, kitten, who's staring at me over the edge of the balcony in a very adorable yet stocky creeper way. Why is it whenever I do this, like, I don't know. Anyway, before we get started, I'll go ahead. I know tonight we're going to be reading maybe the first few chapters of the first book in the Ranger's Apprentice series called The Ruins of Gorlon. And then I think tomorrow night we'll go ahead and try and read the first few chapters from the first book in the Redwall series. I bought these today for pretty cheap, and I love these books. And one thing that happens whenever I find a book and I fall in love with it, I want to read it and share it with somebody else. That's just my thing. And so I thought we'd give this a go and see how it works. And I'm also going to apologize offhand. I'm going to try and do something. And again, since I haven't figured out how to get audio from my computer to go directly into the stream without having to come out of the speakers into the mic and into the stream, it may not sound the best, but I hope it'll kind of work. What I want to do is while I'm reading, like with specific chapters, I'd like to be able to play some kind of like ambiance with it. So it's not just me sitting here with just me and my voice. I want to try and add a little bit more into it. And hopefully if this turns out to be a fun thing, and we continue forward, I'll learn how to do this better, so it will be much nicer. Tonight will kind of be like a crash test, obviously, since this is take number 3, to try and get this to work and see if it's enjoyable. And again, I'd like to be able to continue with it, but we'll see. Okay, so to begin, I'm making sure everything's coming through okay. Wolves. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just read the middle like snippet on the back. Well, don't think of it that way. You're my guinea pig. You're my test audience. At least this time, like okay. Here's the thing: if you're the crash test dummy, I am like the crash test dummy sitting in the car, driving the car toward the wall. So if we go and hit that wall, we're gonna hit it together. Like this isn't just you. We're gonna bring this together. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and read the back of the book. The Rangers, with their shadowy ways, have always made him nervous. And now 15-year-old Will has been chosen as a Ranger's apprentice. But what he doesn't yet realize is that the Rangers are the protectors of the kingdom, who will fight the battles before the battles reach the people. And there is a large battle brewing. The exiled Morgarath, Lord of the Mountains of Rain and Night, is gathering his forces for an attack on the kingdom. This time, he will not be denied. Dun dun dun. So yeah, that's kind of the little brief part of the book. Oh, and now I'm dropping the book. See, this is going so well already. Okay. Okay, so then which of us is Nick and which of us is Knack? That's the real question. Okay. So I am going to ask a legit question, because again, I'm not doing this with headphones in because I think it's the only way right now for what I know of to get audio to come through. And I'm going to try my best not to do this and like make a lot of obnoxious noise. I want to play something. And since you're the only one currently here, excuse me, you'd be able to let me know if you can hear it. And it's probably going to sound like crap, but just let me know if you actually can hear it. Okay. So did the sound come through? That's all I asked. Did the sound come through? Oh. Oh. Just because I know the last few times I've done streams like this, it hasn't gone over really well. And there hasn't actually been sound. And so even if the sound sounds like, no, come on, Google, make up your mind. Make up your mind with what you want to do. Okay. Well, this is great. Yay! Thank you for joining us, Avion. I'm still trying to make this work. I'm still struggling to make this work. Okay. Now we're gonna try this. Yeah, it really has been a mess. Because now I'm not getting any sound to come through at all. And it's like, why? You were kind of... Okay, you heard it a little bit. Okay. Okay. Well, because again, I think the only way I figured out to get sound to come through is if I blast it through my computer's speakers, and then it gets picked up by my mic and then gets to you guys. So, in order for you guys to hear it, I may have to blast it ridiculously loud so it comes through. But yeah, that was actually music from a Monster Hunter game. So that's what that sound was. Okay, let's try this again. All right, so let's try this again, shall we? Okay. Can you guys hear that now? That's supposed to be wind. I'm not going to be playing music while I do this because I don't want to run into issues of copyright. Which I mean, if I did, I wouldn't really care. And so while I'm reading, all I'm wanting to do is what I was really wanting to do was to be able to get sound to come through the computer itself into the stream so it could actually sound nice. And I could play like ambiance type sounds while I was reading. Like if the characters are like in like a creepy, desolate place, that there'd be like howling wind and creepy noises. And if they were in like a happy tavern, you could hear like people chatting in the background. If they were like in a castle and there's like a fireplace crackling, it'd be crackling fire. Like I was wanting to do that. That's what I was wanting to do. But for some reason, with Google Hangouts, I can't get the audio to come from my computer into the stream. Because it seems like the last few times when I have done streams, I'll plug my headphones in so that I'm not getting weird feedback. Because normally I'm in a call with other people while I'm doing it. And then I go back to check out the streams and there's absolutely no sound except talking. Like you can't hear anything from the computer itself. And so I was trying to figure out how to fix that. And then I was using Google, and then I switched over to live stream. But when I switched over to live stream, I was having issues with people, like the link not working for people. And it wasn't like people weren't actually able to get into the stream. And so I thought, you know what, even if this is primitive and it doesn't quite get across what I want to do in the cleanest way, I'm going to try it. And again, this first time was just kind of, I wanted this to be like a fun thing, but I also kind of thought it'd be a test. And if I can find out from somebody how to be able to do that, then hey, stop playing with that picture on the wall. You don't need to knock it over. I don't know why you're so fascinated with that frame. Sorry, I'm yelling at my cat. When that's yelling, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you in a harsh tone. And so if I can figure out how to do it without doing it this way, then we'll do it better next time. But for tonight, I just wanted to try it. I just wanted to try it and see if people actually liked it. But it's not going to be as crisp or as clear as I want it to be. And I may just have to live with it until I can figure out how to do it better next time. So, we should probably go ahead and actually start reading in this stream about reading. Okay. I'm just double checking to make sure there's absolutely nothing else I can do. Okay. Well, it's weird because it's like I know that there are other people who stream and stuff and who've probably been able to manage to get it to work. I'm just wondering how they managed to get it to work. And so I'm sure somebody out there knows and would be able to help. But I'm going to try something. See if it works. Okay, come here. For that. Dave, come down. Okay, wait, come on. So you're coming through here now. Okay. Okay, yeah, that's loud. Hold on. All right, I'm trying something else just because I'm desperate to try something else. Oh, hey, Fox. I was just like, again, I've been telling you this is my third time trying to get this to work because I haven't been able to get audio to come straight from my computer into the stream. Like it'll catch my voice, but if I play music or if I play sound effects or anything on the computer, it won't take it directly from my computer and input it into the stream. The only way I can get it to kind of work is if I have the headphones unplugged and I have the volume obnoxiously loud so that my mic picks it up, but then it just sounds crappy and choppy. And so I'm trying to figure out how to get it to work. And I had an idea, and I'm going to try it and see if it works. Yeah, I'm sure I do. I'm playing something really quick right now. So let me know if you can hear it. I'm assuming no, but I'm trying. I'm actually going to try something different than wind. And that's fine if you are. Okay. Yeah, and that beeping noise is just because my laptop is primitive and it just makes it its own noise, so I apologize. So, okay. So it seems like the only way I'm going to be able to do this is, again, to blast it through, because all I'm not using right now is my Yeti, and I don't really want to drag out my mixer, because I don't know if I can get my Yeti to work through the mixer. I'd have to pull out all my other equipment, which I really don't want to pull out. So for now, it may just have to be, it's going to be crap, and I'm going to have to live with it. Why does it have like 500 Fox things pulled up, even though there's only one? Okay. That's gonna be how we're gonna do this. I'm gonna be like, okay, guys, I need sound effects. Go. And just like give you guys sound effect noises to make it like, okay, I need you to make this noise. I need you to make this noise. Go. Okay. And again, we may have to do it without the sound effects, but it was gonna be so cool. Like we were gonna have sound effects, and it was gonna be really nice and cool, and it was gonna be really, really, really nice. Fully unconscious. Yes. Perfect. Yes, exactly. That's what it's gonna be. It's just weird because there's a part of me that's like, oh, it was gonna be so neat, and there's a part of me that's just like, I'll just do it and just read it without sound effects. But at the same time, it's like, but it's just gonna be my voice, and I'm not trying to put down my voice, but it's just like, but that's not what I wanted to do. Yeah. Oh. And if I could actually share like the pages of the book with you guys so we could all read this together, that'd even be more fun. But I don't know if I can do that, especially legally. So, yeah. Like I said, maybe I can talk with other people who are more knowledgeable about this than me and figure it out later. But for now, I think I'm just going to go ahead and go forward and read and just do my best, I guess. I just want to take that out. Okay. Alrighty. Okay. Oh, that's what you're on about. Okay, never mind. Okay. And I'm actually going to flick a light on so I can see. Don't at me. Okay. Alrighty. I think. Well, I don't know how that would work, but anyway. Okay, I'm going to start delaying and actually get started. Okay. Here we go. All right. So once again, we are reading Ranger's Apprentice, Book 1, The Ruins of Gorlan by John Flanagan. Lol. Okay, and again, what I'll try to do as I go through is I'll try to add the noises and the sounds in the background. And if either A, you can't hear them, or B, they just aren't working for you, like not at least not working well enough to kind of pull across what I'm trying to pull across, just tell me. And we'll just turn off the sound effects and it'll just be me reading with no sound. So again, we'll try it and see how it works. Okay. So we're not starting with chapter 1. We're starting with the prologue. Okay. Time for sound effects. Okay. Morgarath, Lord of the Mountains of Rain and Night, former Baron of Gorlan in the Kingdom of Araluin, looked out over his bleak, rain-swept domain, and, for perhaps the 1000th time, cursed. This was all that was left to him now. A jumble of rugged granite cliffs, tumbled boulders, and icy mountains. Of sheer gorges and steep, narrow passages. Of gravel and rock, with never a tree or a sign of green to break the monotony. Even though it had been 15 years since he had been driven back into this forbidding realm that had become his prison, he could still remember the pleasant green glades and thickly forested hills of his former fief, the streams filled with fish, and the fields rich with crops and game. Gorlan had been a beautiful, living place. The mountains of Rain and Night were dead and desolate. A platoon of wargles was drilling in the castle yard below him. Morgarath watched them for a few seconds, listening to the guttural rhythmic chant that accompanied their movements. They were stocky, misshapen beings, with features that were halfway human, but with a long, brutish muzzle and fangs like a bear or a large dog. Avoiding all contact with humans, the wargles had lived and bred in these remote mountains since ancient times. No one in living memory had ever set eyes upon them, but rumors and legends had persisted of a savage tribe of semi-intelligent beasts in the mountains. Morgarath, planning a revolt against the kingdom of Araluin, had left Gorlan Fife to seek them out. If such creatures existed, they would give him an edge in the war that was to come. It took months, but he eventually found them. Aside from their wordless chant, Wargles had no spoken language, relying on a primitive form of thought awareness for communication. But their minds were simple, and their intellects basic. As a result, they had been totally susceptible to domination by a superior intelligence and willpower. Morgorath bent them to his will, and they became the perfect army for him. Ugly beyond nightmares, utterly pitiless, and bound totally to his mental orders. Now looking at them, he remembered the brightly dressed knights in glittering armor who used to compete in tourneys at Castle Gorlan, their silk-gowned ladies cheering them on and applauding their skills. Mentally comparing them to these black-furred, misshapen creatures, he cursed again. The Wargles attuned to his thoughts, sensed his disturbance, and stirred uncomfortably, pausing in what they were doing. Angrily, he directed them back to their drill, and the chanting resumed. Morgorath moved away from the unglazed window, closer to the fire that seemed utterly incapable of dispelling the damp and chill from this gloomy castle. 15 years, he thought to himself again. 15 years since he had rebelled against the newly crowned King Duncan, a youth in his 20s. He had planned it all carefully as the old king's sickness progressed, banking on the indecision and confusion that would follow his death to split the other barons and give Morgorath his opportunity to seize the throne. Secretly, he had trained his army of Wargles, massing them up here in the mountains, ready for the moment to strike. Then, in the days of confusion and grief following the king's death, when the barons traveled to Castle Oraluwen for the funeral rites, leaving their armies leaderless, he had attacked, overrunning the southeastern quarter of the kingdom in a matter of days, routing the confused, leaderless forces that tried to oppose him. Duncan, young and inexperienced, could never have stood against him. The kingdom was his for the taking, the throne his for the asking. Then Lord Nordholt, the old king's supreme army commander, had rallied some of the younger barons into a loyal confederation, giving strength to Duncan's resolve and stiffening the wavering courage of the others. The armies had met at Hackham Heath, close by the Slipsunder River, and the battle swayed in the balance for 5 hours, with attack and counterattack and massive loss of life. The Slipsunder was a shallow river, but its treacherous reaches of quicksand and soft mud had formed an impassable barrier, protecting Morgorath's right flank. But then one of those gray-cloaked meddlers known as Rangers led a force of heavy cavalry across a secret ford 10 kilometers upstream. The armored horsemen appeared at the crucial moment of the battle and fell upon the rear of Morgorath's army. The Wargles, trained in the tumbled rocks of the mountains, had one weakness. They feared horses and could never stand against such a surprise cavalry attack. They broke, retreating to the narrow confines of Three-Step Pass and back to the mountains of Rain and Night. Morgorath, his rebellion defeated, went with them. And here he had been exiled these 15 years, waiting, plotting, hating the men who had done this to him. Now, he thought, it was time for his revenge. His spies had told him the kingdom had grown slack and complacent, and its presence here was all but forgotten. The name Morgorath was a name of legend nowadays, a name mothers used to hush fractious children, threatening them that if they did not behave, the Black Lord Morgorath would come for them. The time was ripe. Once again, he could lead his Wargles into an attack. But this time, he would have allies. And this time, he would sow the ground with uncertainty and confusion beforehand. This time, none of those who conspired against him previously would be left alive to aid King Duncan. For the Wargles were not the only ancient, terrifying creatures he had found in these somber mountains. He had 2 other allies, even more fearsome. The dreadful beasts known as the Kalkara. The time was ripe to unleash them. Oh, that's actually a really cute image. That's actually really adorable. Just being like, gather around, pups, I'm going to tell you a story. It's time for a story. Okay. So before I move on to the next chapter, I do want to ask you guys, and I want honest answers, which I know I can expect from you guys because you're amazing like that. The wind in the background and stuff, did that aid in anything at all, or was it more distracting? Because if so, we don't need the sound effects. We could always do it without them. Or based on that image you represented, Saber, I could always just maybe try and pull up a fire crackling sound effect to have in the background. Whichever works. Excuse me, sorry. Okay, cool. So we have one vote for keep it in. Okay. Let me see. While we're figuring that out, I'm going to find the sound effect for the next scene. Okay, cool. All right, so we'll keep it in. Alrighty. Can you guys hear that? Okay. Oh, yay. Cool. Let me see if I can find a better one. Hold on. I might use that one, but let me see if I can find a slightly different one to use. Hold on. Well, actually go back to that one. And then... Hello, kitty, kitty. How you doing, my darling? How does this one sound like? Oh, a picture of Vespa telling a story to young pups around a fire. Okay, so when I talk, it kind of disrupts it a bit, but okay, again, as long as it's not too distracting for you guys, that's what'll work. Okay, I like this one better. I'm going to keep this one. Okay. Alrighty, so now we're past prologue, and we're jumping into chapter 1. I'm sorry, I felt the sneeze coming. I was like, no, don't come sneeze, no. Try to eat something, Will. Tomorrow's a big day after all. Jenny, blonde, pretty, and cheerful, gestured towards Will's barely touched plate and smiled encouragingly at him. Will made an attempt to return the smile, but it was a dismal failure. He picked at the plate before him, piled high with his favorite foods. Tonight, his stomach knotted tight with tension and anticipation. He could hardly bring himself to swallow a bite. Tomorrow would be a big day, he knew. He knew it all too well, in fact. Tomorrow would be the biggest day of his life, because tomorrow was the choosing day, and it would determine how he spent the rest of his life. Nerves, I imagine, said George, setting down his loaded fork and seizing the lapels of his jacket in a judicious manner. He was a thin, gangly, and studious boy, fascinated by rules and regulations, and with a penchant for examining and debating both sides of any question, sometimes at great length. Dreadful things, nervousness. It can just freeze you up so you can't think, can't eat, can't speak. I'm not nervous, Will said quickly, noticing that Horace had looked up, ready to form a sarcastic comment. George nodded several times, considering Will's statement. On the other hand, he added, a little nervousness can actually improve performance. It can heighten your perceptions and sharpen your reactions. So the fact that you are worried, if in fact you are, is not necessarily something to be worried about of itself, so to speak. In spite of himself, a wry smile touched Will's mouth. George would be a natural in the legal profession, he thought. He would almost certainly be the scribe master's choice on the following morning. Perhaps, Will thought, that was at the heart of his own problem. He was the only one of the wardmates who had any fears about the choosing that would take place within 12 hours. He ought to be nervous, Horace scoffed. After all, which craft master's going to want him for an apprentice? Oh, well, thank you. That's very sweet of you. I'm sure we're all nervous, Alice said. She directed one of her rare smiles at Will. We'd be stupid not to be. Well, I'm not, Horace said, then reddened as Alice raised one eyebrow, and Jenny giggled. It was typical of Alice, Will thought. He knew that the tall, graceful girl had already been promised a place as an apprentice by Lady Pauline, head of Castle Redmont's diplomatic service. Her pretense that she was nervous about the following day, and her tact in refraining from pointing out Horace's gaffe, showed that she was already a diplomat of some skill. Jenny, of course, would gravitate immediately to the castle kitchens, domain of Master Chubb, Redmont's head chef. He was a man renowned throughout the kingdom for the banquets served in the castle's I need to stop tripping over my words. In the castle's massive dining hall. Jenny loved food and cooking, and her easygoing nature and unfailing good humor would make her an invaluable staff member in the turmoil of the castle kitchens. Battle school would be Horace's choice. Will glanced at his wardmates now, hungrily tucking into the roast turkey, ham, and potatoes that he had heaped onto his plate. Horace was big for his age, and a natural athlete. The chances that he would be refused were virtually non-existent. Horace was exactly the type of recruit that Sir Rodney looked for in his warrior apprentices. Strong, athletic, fit. Oh, thank you. And, thought Will a trifle sourly, not too bright. Battle school was the path to knighthood for boys like Horace, born commoners, but with the physical abilities to serve as knights of the kingdom. Oh, really? Huh. I did not know that. Thank you for expanding my mind, my friend. Which left Will. What would his choice be? More importantly, as Horace had pointed out, what craft master would accept him as an apprentice? For choosing day was the pivotal point in the life of the castle wards. They were orphan children, raised by the generosity of Baron Errold, the Lord of Redmont Fife. Is it Fife or Fief? I think it's Fife, because it's like fiefdom, I think. I'm going to keep pronouncing it Fife, unless I'm wrong. For the most part, their parents had died in the service of the Fife, and the Baron saw it as his responsibility to care for and raise the children of his former subjects, and to give them an opportunity to improve their station in life whenever possible. Choosing Day provided that opportunity. Each year, castle wards turning 15 could apply to be apprenticed to the masters of the various crafts that served the castle and its people. Ordinarily, craft apprentices were selected by dint of their parents' occupation or influence with the craft masters. The castle wards usually had no such influence, and this was their chance to win a future for themselves. Those wards who weren't chosen, or for whom no openings could be found, would be assigned to farming families in the nearby village, providing farm labor to raise crops and animals that fed the castle inhabitants. It was rare for this to happen, Will knew. The Baron and his craft masters usually went out of their way to fit the wards into one craft or another. But it could happen, and it was a fate he feared more than anything. Horace caught his eye now and gave him a smug smile. Still planning on applying for battle school, Will? He asked through a mouthful of turkey and potatoes. Better eat something, then. You'll need to build yourself up a little. He snorted with laughter, and Will glowered at him. A few weeks previously, Horace had overheard Will confiding to Alice that he desperately wanted to be selected for battle school, and he had made Will's life a misery ever since, putting out on every possible occasion that Will's slight build was totally unsuited for the rigors of battle school training. The fact that Horace was probably right only made matters worse. Where Horace was tall and muscular, Will was small and wiry. He was agile and fast and surprisingly strong, but he simply didn't have the size that he was required for battle school apprentices. He'd hoped against hope for the past few years that he would have what people called his growing spurt before the choosing day came around. But it had never happened, and now the day was nearly here. As Will said nothing, Horace sensed that he had scored a verbal hit. This was a rarity in their turbulent relationship. Over the past few years, he and Will had clashed repeatedly. Being the stronger of the two, Horace usually got the better of Will, although very occasionally Will's speed and agility allowed him to get in a surprise kick or punch, and then escape before Horace could catch him. But while Horace generally had the best of their physical clashes, it was unusual for him to win any of their verbal encounters. Will's wit was as agile as the rest of him, and he almost always managed to have the last word. In fact, it was this tendency that often led to trouble between them. Will was yet to learn that having the last word was not always a good idea. Horace decided now to press his advantage. You need muscles to get into battle school, Will. Real muscles, he said, glancing at the others around the table to see if anyone disagreed. The other wards, uncomfortable at the growing tension between the two boys, concentrated on their plates. Particularly between the ears, Will replied, and unfortunately Jenny couldn't refrain from giggling. Horace's face flushed, and he started to rise from his seat. But Will was quicker, and he was already at the door before Horace could disentangle himself from his chair. He contented himself with hurling a final insult after his retreating wardmate. That's right! Run away, Will No-Name! You're no-name and nobody will want you as an apprentice! In the empty room outside, Will heard the parting sally and felt blood flush to his cheek. It was the taunt he hated most, although he had tried never to let Horace know that, sensing that he would provide the bigger boy with a weapon if he did. The truth was, nobody knew Will's second name. Nobody knew who his parents had been. Unlike his yearmates who had lived in the fife before their parents had died and whose family histories were known, Will had appeared virtually out of nowhere as a newborn baby. He had been found wrapped in a small blanket and placed in a basket on the step of the ward building 15 years ago. A note had been attached to the blanket reading simply, His mother died in childbirth. His father died a hero. Please care for him. His name is Will. That year there had been only one other ward. Alyssa's father was a Sorry, hold on. Where was that one that I wanted to play? It disappeared. Where did it go? Sorry, sounds are going to be changing quick. Hold on. There we go. I appreciate that joke. Oh, this isn't getting the thing I'm wanting to come across. No. Yeah, no kidding. No, that's not what I want. We'll go with this one. No. Ugh. Sorry. I'm like... Oh, thank you. Oh, goodness. Oh, magic, I'm so magic. Okay. That year, there had been only one other ward. Alice's father was a cavalry lieutenant who had died in the battle at Harkham Heath when Morgorath's Wargle army had been defeated and driven back to the mountains. Alice's mother, devastated by her loss, succumbed to a fever some weeks after giving birth. So there was plenty of room in the ward for an unknown child, and Baron Errol was, at heart, a kindly man. Even though the circumstances were unusual, he had given permission for Will to be accepted as a ward of Castle Redmont. It seemed logical to assume that, if the note were true, Will's father had died in the war against Morgorath, and since Baron Errol had taken a leading part in that war, he felt duty-bound to honor the unknown father's sacrifice. So Will had become a Redmont ward, raised and educated by the Baron's generosity. As time passed, the others had gradually joined him, and Alice until there were 5 in their year group. But while the others had memories of their parents, or, in Alice's case, people who had known them and who could tell her about them, Will knew nothing of his past. That was why he had invented the story that had sustained him throughout his childhood and the ward. And as the years passed and he added detail and color to the story, he eventually came to believe it himself. His father, he knew, had died a hero's death. So it made sense to create a picture of him as a hero, a knight warrior in full armor, fighting against the Wargle hordes, cutting them down left and right, until eventually he was overcome by sheer weight of numbers. Will had pictured the tall figure so often in his mind, seeing every detail of his armor and his equipment, but never being able to visualize his face. As a warrior, his father would expect him to follow in his footsteps. That was why selection for battle school was so important to Will. And that was why the more unlikely it became that he would be selected, the more desperately he clung to the hope that he might. He exited from the ward building into the darkened castle yard. The sun was long down, and the torches placed every 20 meters or so on the castle walls shed a flickering, uneven light. He hesitated a moment. He would not return to the ward and face Horace's continued taunts. To do so would only lead to another fight between them. A fight that Will knew he would probably lose. George would probably try to analyze the situation for him, looking at both sides of the question and thoroughly confusing the issue. Alice and Jenny might try to comfort him, he knew. Alice particularly, since they had grown up together. But at the moment, he didn't want their sympathy, and he couldn't face Horace's taunts, so he headed for the one place where he knew he could find solitude. The huge fig tree growing close by the castle's central tower had often afforded him a haven. Heights held no fear for Will, and he climbed smoothly into the tree, continuing long after another might have stopped, until he was in the lighter branches at the very top. Branches that swayed and dipped under his weight. In the past, he had often escaped from Horace here. The bigger boy couldn't match Will's speed in the tree, and he was unwilling to follow as high as this. Will found a convenient fork and wedged himself in it, his body giving slightly to the movement of the tree as the branches swayed in the evening breeze. His father is Morgorath. Oh no, we're pulling a Star Wars here. Ah! Okay. Below, the 4 shortened figures of the watch made their rounds of the castle yard. He heard the door of the ward building open and, glancing down, saw Alice emerge, looking around the yard for him in vain. The tall girl hesitated a few moments, then, seeming to shrug, turned back inside. The elongated rectangle of light that the open door threw across the yard was cut off as she closed the door softly behind her. Strange, he thought, how seldom people tend to look up. There was a rustle of soft feathers, and a barn owl landed on the next branch, its head swiveling, its huge eyes catching every last ray of the faint light. It studied him without concern, seeming to know it had nothing to fear from him. It was a hunter, a silent flyer, a ruler of the night. At least you know who you are, he said softly to the bird. It swiveled its head again, then launched itself off into the darkness, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Gradually, as he sat there, the lights of the castle windows went out, one by one. The torches burnt down to smoldering husks, and were replaced at midnight by the castle watch. Eventually, there was only one light left burning, and that he knew was in the Baron's study, where the Lord of Redmount was presumably still at work, poring over reports and papers. The study was virtually level with Will's position in the tree, and he could see the burly figure of the Baron seated at his desk. Finally, Baron Errold rose, stretched, and leaned forward to extinguish the lamp as he left the room, heading for his sleeping quarters on the floor above. Now the castle was asleep, except for the guards on the walls, who kept constant watch. In less than 9 hours, Will realized, he would face the choosing. Silently, miserably fearing the worst, he climbed down from the tree and made his way to his bed in the darkened boys' dormitory in the ward. And that is chapter 1! Yay! But I agree, owls indeed are awesome. Trying to find another sound effect. Oh my gosh, every time I've tried to read this aloud, I always stumble across Baron Errold and call him Baron Aaron. And I'm like, no, your name's not Baron Aaron. It's like, no, that's not your name. And I stumble over it all the time, and it drives me crazy. Okay. This work? No. Let me see. What does this sound like? No, I don't need. Stop. No singing. No. Shush. No singing. No. No, that's way too loud. Huh? Oh my gosh. That would be so mean. That's amazing, but that's also horrible, and I love it. Oh, that's funny. Okay, this one will work. Okay. Alrighty. I'll start it up already. Okay. I need to sit back. I'm crouching forward, and that's uncomfortable. Alright. Chapter 2. I always struggle about a voice with this guy. Like, I don't know. He's like, yes, poor Erin. She has a hard life. She's like, guys, it's not my fault I'm barren. Give me a break. Okay. All right, I think I got a voice for him. All right, candidates, this way, and look lively. The speaker, or more currently the shouter, was Martin, secretary to Baron Errold. As his voice echoed around the anteroom, the 5 wards rose uncertainly from the long wooden benches where they had been seated. Suddenly nervous now that the day had finally arrived, they began to shuffle forward, each one reluctant to be the first through the great iron-bound doors that Martin now held open for them. Come on, come on! Martin bellowed impatiently. Alice finally elected to lead the way, as Will had guessed she would. The others followed the willowy blonde girl. Now that someone had decided to lead, the rest of them were content to follow. Will looked around curiously as he entered the Baron's study. He had never been in this part of the castle before. This tower, containing the administrative section and the Baron's private apartments, was seldom visited by those of low rank, such as castle wards. The room was huge. The ceiling seemed to tower above him, and the walls were constructed of massive stone blocks, fitted together with only the barest lines of mortar between them. On the eastern wall was a huge window space, open to the elements and with massive wooden shutters that could be closed in the event of bad weather. It was the same window he had seen through last night, he realized. Today, sunlight streamed in and fell on the huge oak table that Baron Errold used as a desk. Sorry about getting the sound on. Come on now! Stand in line! Stand in line! Martin seemed to be enjoying his moment of authority. The group shuffled slowly into line, and he studied them, his mouth twisted in disapproval. In size, place! Tallest this end! He indicated the end where he wanted the tallest of the 5 to stand. Gradually, the group rearranged itself. Horace, of course, was the tallest. After him, Alice took her position. Then George, half a head shorter than she and painfully thin. He stood in his usual stoop-shouldered posture. Will and Jenny had... Okay. Why are you making all these creaky noises? This is not the noises I wanted. I just wanted a nice noise. We're gonna do this one instead. Just fire and wind. That's always a good combination. All right, where did I leave off? Okay, there we go. Will and Jenny hesitated. Jenny smiled at Will and gestured for him to go before her, even though she was possibly an inch taller than he was. That was typical of Jenny. She knew how Will agonized over the fact that he was the smallest of all the castle wards. As Will moved into the line, Martin's voice stopped him. Not you! The girl's next! Sound effects, you're fired! Get out of my office! Get out of my face! You failed me! Jenny shrugged apologetically and moved into the place Martin had indicated. Will took the last place in the line, wishing Martin hadn't made his lack of height so apparent. Come on! Smarten up! Let's see you with attention there! Martin continued, then broke off as a deep voice interrupted him. I don't believe that's totally necessary, Martin. It was Baron Errold, who had entered unobserved by way of a smaller door behind his desk. Now it was Martin who brought himself to what he considered to be a posture of attention. With his skinny elbows held out from his sides, his heels forced together so that his unmistakably bowed legs were widely spread at the knees, and his head thrown back. Baron Errold raised his eyes to heaven. Sometimes his secretary's zeal on these occasions could be a little overwhelming. The Baron was a big man, broad in shoulder and waist, and heavily muscled, as was necessary for a knight of the realm. It was well known, however, that Baron Errold was fond of his food and drink, so his considerable bulk was not totally attributable to muscle. He had a short, neatly trimmed black beard that, like his hair, was beginning to show the traces of gray that went into his 42 years. He had a strong jaw, a large nose, and dark, piercing eyes under heavy brows. It was a powerful face, but not an unkind one, Will thought. There was a surprising hint of humor in those dark eyes. Will had noted it before, on the occasion when Errol had made his infrequent visits to the ward's quarters to see how their lessons and personal development were progressing. "Sir!" Martin said at top volume, causing the Baron to wince slightly. "The candidates are assembled!" "I can see that," Baron Errol replied patiently. "Perhaps you might be good enough to ask the craftmasters to step in as well." "Sir!" Martin responded, making an attempt to click his heels together. As he was wearing shoes of a soft, pliable leather, the attempt was doomed to failure. He marched toward the main door of the study, all elbows and knees. Will was reminded of a rooster. As Martin laid his hand on the door handle, the Baron stopped him once more. "Martin," he said softly. As the secretary turned an inquiring look back at him, he continued in the same quiet tone. "Ask them. Don't bellow at them. Craftmasters don't like that." "Yes, sir," said Martin, looking somewhat deflated. He opened the door and, making an obvious effort to speak in a lower tone, said, "Craftmasters, the Baron is ready now." The craft school heads entered the room in no particular order of precedence. As a group, they admired and respected one another, and so rarely stood on strict ceremonial procedure. Sir Rodney, head of the battle school, came first. "Martin, most annoying character. You get an award. You tried." He gets the "you tried" award. Tall and broad-shouldered like the Baron, he wore the standard battle dress of chainmail shirt under a white surcoat emblazoned with his own crest, a scarlet wolf's head. He had earned that crest as a young man, fighting the wolf ships of the Scandian sea raiders, who constantly harried the kingdom's east coast. He wore a sword belt and sword, of course. No knight would be seen in public without one. He was around the Baron's age, with blue eyes and a face that would have been remarkably handsome, massively broken nose. He sported an enormous mustache, but unlike the Baron, he had no beard. Next came Ulf, the horsemaster, responsible for the care and training of the castle's mighty battle horses. He had keen brown eyes, strong muscular forearms, and heavy wrists. He wore a simple leather vest over his woolen shirt and leggings. Tall riding boots of soft leather reached up past his knees. Lady Pauline followed Ulf. Slim, gray-haired, and elegant, she had been a considerable beauty in her youth, and still had the grace and style to turn men's heads. Lady Pauline, who had been awarded the title in her own right for her own work in foreign policy for the kingdom, was head of the diplomatic service of Redmont. Baron Errol regarded her abilities highly, and she was one of his close confidants and advisors. Errol often said that girls made the best recruits to the diplomatic service. They tended to be more subtle than boys, who gravitated naturally to battle school. And while boys constantly looked to physical means as the way of solving problems, girls could be depended on to use their wits. It was perhaps only natural that Nigel, the scribe-master, followed close behind Lady Pauline. They had been discussing matters of mutual interest while they waited for Martin to summon them. Nigel and Lady Pauline were close friends, as well as professional colleagues. It was Nigel's trained scribes who prepared the official documents and communiques that were often delivered by Lady Pauline's diplomats. He also advised on the exact wording of such documents, having an extensive background in legal matters. Nigel was a small, wiry man, with a quick, inquisitive face that reminded Will of a ferret. His hair was glossy black, his features thin, and his dark eyes never ceased roaming the room. Master Chubb, the castle cook, came in last of all. Inevitably, he was a fat, round-bellied man, wearing a cook's white jacket and tall hat. He was known to have a terrible temper that could flare as quickly as oil spilled on a fire, and most of the wards treated him with considerable caution. Florid-faced and with red, rapidly receding hair, Master Chubb carried a wooden ladle with him wherever he went. It was an unofficial staff of office. It was also used quite often as an offensive weapon, landing with a resounding crack on the heads of careless, forgetful, or slow-moving kitchen apprentices. Alone among the group, Jenny saw Chubb as something of a hero. It was her avowed intention to work for him and learn his skills, wooden ladle or no wooden ladle. There were other craftmasters, of course. The armorer and the blacksmith were too. But only those craftmasters who currently had vacancies for new apprentices would be represented today. "The craftmasters are assembled, sir!" Martin said, his voice raising in volume. I know some of the names in these books are awesome. Martin seemed to equate volume and the importance of the occasion in direct proportion. Once again, the Baron raised his eyes to heaven. "So I see," he said quietly, then added in a more formal tone, "Good morning, Lady Pauline. Good morning, gentlemen." They replied, and the Baron turned to Martin once more. "Perhaps we might proceed." Martin nodded several times, consulted a sheaf of notes he held in one hand, and marched to confront the line of candidates. "Right! The Baron's waiting! The Baron's waiting! Who's first?" Will, eyes down, shifting nervously from one foot to the other, suddenly had the strange sensation that someone was watching him. He looked up and actually started with surprise as he met the dark, unfathomable gaze of Halt, the ranger. Will hadn't seen him come into the room. He realized that the mysterious figure must have slipped in through a side door while everyone's attention was on the craftmasters as they made their entrance. Now he stood behind the Baron's chair and slightly to one side, dressed in his usual brown and gray clothes and wrapped in his long, mottled gray and green ranger's cloak. Halt was an unnerving person. He had a habit of coming up on you when you least expected it, and you never heard his approach. The superstitious villagers believed that rangers practiced a form of magic that made them invisible to ordinary people. Will wasn't sure if he believed that, but he wasn't sure he disbelieved it either. He wondered why Halt was here today. He wasn't recognized as one of the craftmasters, and as far as Will knew, he hadn't attended a choosing session prior to this one. Oh, believe me, Avion, Halt is amazing. He's one of my favorite characters in this whole series. He is the bomb.com. I love him so much. He is the best. You have good taste. Abruptly, Halt's gaze cut away from him, and it was as if a light had been turned on. Will realized that Martin was talking once more. He noticed that the secretary had a habit of repeating statements, as if he was followed by his own personal echo. Now then, who's first? Who's first? The Baron sighed audibly. Why don't we take the first in line? He suggested in a reasonable tone, and Martin nodded several times. Of course, my lord, of course. First in line, step forward, face the Baron. After a moment's hesitation, Horace stepped forward out of the line and stood at attention. The Baron studied him for a few seconds. Name, he said, and Horace answered, stumbling slightly over the correct method of address for the Baron. You think, Saber? You think I'm going to show Holt a little bit more love than everyone else? Yes, maybe. Horace Altman, sir. My lord. And do you have a preference, Horace? The Baron asked, with the air of one who knows what the answer is going to be before hearing it. Battle school, sir, Horace said firmly. The Baron nodded. He had expected as much. He glanced at Rodney, who was studying the boy thoughtfully, assessing his suitability. Battle master, the Baron said. Normally he would address Rodney by his first name, not his title. But this was a formal occasion. By the same token, Rodney would usually address the Baron as Sir. But on a day like today, my lord was the proper form. The big knight stepped forward, his chainmail and spurs chinking slightly as he moved closer to Horace. He eyed the boy up and down, then moved behind him. Horace's head started to turn with him. Still, Sir Rodney said, and the boy ceased his movement, staring straight ahead. Looks strong enough, my lord, and I can always use a new trainees. He rubbed one hand over his chin. You right, Horace Altman? A look of uncertainty crossed Horace's face as he realized this might be a hurdle to his selection. Well, no, sir. He was about to add that castle wards had little chance to learn to ride, but Sir Rodney interrupted him. No matter. That can be taught. The big knight looked at the Baron and nodded. Very well, my lord. I'll take him for battle school, subject to the usual 3-month probationary period. The Baron made a note on a sheet of paper before him and smiled briefly at the delighted and very relieved youth before him. Congratulations, Horace. Report to battle school tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp. Yes, sir, Horace replied, grinning widely. He turned to Sir Rodney and bowed slightly. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, the knight replied cryptically. You don't know what you're in for. And that's the end of chapter 2. Yay! I'm trying to crack my back. Yay! Okay. I'm going to have to remember what accents I gave all these characters when I continue on. Oh. And if some characters' voices sound the same, I'm sorry. There's only so many voices I can do. As I choke on ice. Oh, thank you. I try my best. Again, as we go farther into the story, more characters crop up. There may be repetitions, but I'll try my best to keep them as separate as I can. Okay. Excuse me. Hold on. I'm checking something super quick before we move forward. Okay. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you guys are having fun with this. I'm having a lot of fun. Okay. All right, I'm just putting out some feelers to see if anybody else wants to join us in our fun. Okay. every character is Princess Vespa. It's just like, if for some reason it reminds me of a bit that somebody did, like when they were playing video games, and they're like, every character is George Clooney. And it was like, for some reason, it was really funny. It was like, all I can think of is just like, you come with me. Okay, yes, sir. Prepare for surgery. Yes, sir. Barf, barf, barf. Get that dog out of here. Yes, sir. Barf, barf, barf. And so for some reason, that's all I can think of. Okay, we'll keep going. Chapter 3. Who's next, then? Martin was calling as Horace, grinning broadly, stepped back into the line. Alice stepped forward gracefully, annoying Martin, who had wanted to nominate her as the next candidate. Alice Mainwaring, my lord, she said in her quiet, level voice. Then, before she could be asked, she continued. I request an appointment to the diplomatic service, please, my lord. Harold smiled at the solemn-looking girl. She had an air of self-confidence and poise about her that would suit her well in the service. He glanced at Lady Pauline. It's very true, you do. My lady, he said. She nodded her head several times. I've already spoken to Alice, my lord. I believe she will be an excellent candidate. Approved and accepted. Alice made a small bow of her head in the direction of the woman who would be her mentor. Will thought how alike they were. Both tall and elegant in their movements, both grave in manner. He felt a small surge of pleasure for his oldest companion, knowing how much she had wanted this selection. Alice stepped back in line, and Martin, not to be forestalled this time, was already pointing to George. Right, you're next! You're next! Address the Baron! George stepped forward. His mouth opened and closed several times, but nothing came out. The other wards watched in surprise. George, long regarded by them all as the official advocate for just about everything, was overcome with stage fright. He finally managed to say something in a low voice that nobody in the room could hear. Baron Errol leaned forward, one hand cupped behind his ear. I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that, he said. George looked up at the Baron and with an enormous effort spoke in a just audible voice. George Carter, sir. Scribe school, sir. Martin, ever a stickler for the proprieties, drew breath in to berate him for the truncated nature of his address. Before he could do so, and to everyone's evident relief, Baron Errol stepped in. Very well, Martin, let it go. Martin looked a little aggrieved, but subsided. The Baron glanced at Nigel, his chief scribe and legal officer, one eyebrow raised in question. Oh, now I gotta do another voice. Oh, okay. Why would you make that joke, Trevor? Why? I'm trying to think of a voice that distract me with a Trump joke. Okay. Okay. I gotta think. I'm just gonna shoot wild. Acceptable, my lord, he said, adding, I've seen some of George's work, and he really does have a gift for calligraphy. I don't know why I gave him that accent. It just happened, and we're sticking with it. The Baron looked doubtful. He's not the most forceful of speakers, though, is he, Scribe Master? That could be a problem if he has to offer legal counsel at any time in the future. Nigel shrugged the objection aside. I promise you, my lord, with proper training, that sort of thing represents no problem. Absolutely no problem at all, my lord. The Scribe Master folded his hands together into the wide sleeves of his monk-like habit he wore as he warmed to his theme. I remember a boy who joined us some 7 years back, rather like this one here, as a matter of fact. He had that same habit of mumbling to his shoes, but we soon showed him how to overcome it. Some of our most reluctant speakers have gone on to develop absolute eloquence, my lord, absolute eloquence. The Baron drew breath to comment, but Nigel continued in his discourse. It may even surprise you to hear that as a boy myself, I myself suffered from a most terrible nervous stutter. Absolutely terrible, my lord. Could barely put 2 words together at a time. Hardly a problem now, I see. The Baron managed to put in dryly, and Nigel smiled, taking the point. He bowed to the Baron. Exactly, my lord. We'll soon help young George overcome his shyness. Nothing like the rough and tumble of scribe school for that, absolutely. The Baron smiled in spite of himself. The scribe school was a studious place where voices were rarely, if ever, raised and where logical, reasoned debate reigned supreme. Personally, on his visits to the place, he had found it mind-numbing in the extreme. Anything less like a rough and tumble atmosphere he could not imagine. I'll take your word for it, he replied, and then to George he said, Very well, George, request granted. Report to scribe school tomorrow. George shuffled his feet awkwardly. He said, and the Baron leaned forward again, frowning as he tried to make out the low-pitched words. "What was that?" he asked. George finally looked up and managed to whisper, "Thank you, my lord." He hurriedly shuffled back to the relative anonymity of the line. "Oh," said the Baron, a little taken aback. "Think nothing of it. Now, next is—" Jenny was already stepping forward. Blonde and pretty, she was also, it had to be admitted, a little on the chubby side. But the looks... Aw, thank you. I appreciate that. Hold on just a second. I'll jump back into it. And... One moment, please. Hold on, just 1 second. Moment. Okay. Okay, hold on. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Before we jump into the next chapter, I might have to get a glass of water. Okay, anyway. I gotta go back to the previous sentence. Okay. Blonde and pretty, she was also, it had to be admitted, a little on the chubby side. But the look suited her, and at any of the castle social functions, she was a much sought-after dance partner with the boys in the castle, both her yearmates in the ward and the sons of castle staff as well. "Master Chubb, sir," she said now, stepping forward right to the edge of the Baron's desk. The Baron looked into the round face, saw the eagerness shining there in the blue eyes, and couldn't help smiling at her. "What about him?" he asked gently, and she hesitated, realizing that in her enthusiasm, she had breached the protocol of the choosing. "Oh, your pardon, sir, my Baron, your lordship," she hastily improvised, her tongue running away with her as she mangled the correct form of address. "My lord!" Martin prompted her. Baron Errol looked at him, eyebrows raised. "Yes, Martin," he said. "What is it?" Martin had the grace to look embarrassed. He knew that his master was intentionally misunderstanding his interruption. He took a deep breath and said in an apologetic tone, I simply wanted to inform you that the candidate's name is Jennifer Dalby, sir." The Baron nodded at him, and Martin, a devoted servant of the heavy-bearded man, saw the look of approval in his lord's eyes. "Thank you, Martin. Now, Jennifer Dalby—" "Jenny, sir," said the irrepressible girl, and he shrugged resignedly. "Jenny, then. I assume that you're applying to be apprentice to Master Chubb?" "Oh, yes, please, sir," Jenny replied breathlessly, turning adoring eyes on the portly, red-haired cook. Chubb scowled thoughtfully and considered her. Could be, he muttered, walking back and forth in front of her. She smiled winningly at him, but Chubb was beyond such feminine wiles. "I'd work hard, sir," she told him earnestly. "I know you would," he replied with some spirit. "I'd make sure of it, girl. No slacking or lollygagging in my kitchen, let me tell you." Fearing that her opportunity might be slipping away, Jenny played her trump card. Aw, Martin is favorite character now. Martin is best character. Saber said it. Martin is best. "I have the right shape for it," she said. Chubb had to agree that she was well-rounded. Errol, not for the first time that morning, hid a smile. "She has a point there, Chubb," he put in, and the cook turned to him in agreement. "Shape is important, sir. All great cooks tend to be rounded." He turned back to the girl, still considering. It was all very well for the others to accept their trainees in the wink of an eye, he thought. But cooking was something special. "Tell me," he said to the eager girl, "what would you do with a turkey pie?" Jenny smiled dazzlingly at him. Eat it, she answered immediately. Chubb rapped her on the head with the ladle he carried. I meant, what would you do about cooking it? He asked. Jenny hesitated, gathered her thoughts, then plunged into a lengthy technical description of how she would go about constructing such a masterpiece. The other 4 wards, the Baron, his craftmasters, and Martin, listened in some awe, with absolutely no comprehension of what she was saying. Chubb, however, nodded several times as she spoke, interrupting as she detailed the rolling of the pastry. 9 times, you say? He said curiously, and Jenny nodded, sure of her ground. My mother always said, 8 times to make it flaky, and once more for love, she said. Chubb nodded thoughtfully. Interesting, he said. Then looking up at the Baron, he nodded. I'll take her, my lord. What a surprise, the Baron said mildly, then added, Very well. Report to the kitchens in the morning, Jennifer. Jenny, sir, the girl corrected him again, her smile lighting up the room. Baron Errol smiled. He glanced at the small group before him. And that leaves us with one more candidate. He glanced at his list, then looked up to meet Will's agonizing gaze, gesturing encouragement. Will stepped forward, nervousness suddenly drying his throat, so that his voice came out in barely a whisper. Well, sir, my name is Will. Okay, that's the end of chapter 3. I know, Jenny is like so precious. She's just so cute. Okay, before we keep going, I'm going to jump up really quick, and I'm going to get myself a glass of water so my throat doesn't go on mutiny against me. I will be right back. Don't you go nowhere. Okay. Legs. Just throw them in the fridge. Would you like another snack? I'll get you another snack. What happened there? It was just a cover. It's not actually. Just thought. Dang it. Oh, well. Well, no, hold on. I'll be right back. I'm almost done. Sorry, I caught on something. I made a noise. Didn't mean to smoke you. I'm sorry this is taking a little bit longer than I anticipated. I forgot I had some laundry, and so I'm really quick gonna make sure things are folded and hung up, and I will come right back. I promise. I promise I'm coming back. Consider this an intermission. There we go. Okay. Everybody has returned. Good. Good timing. Good timing. Yes, yes. Perfect. Welcome back, everybody, to Reading with Coco. So glad to have you here. It is perfect and wonderful to see you. Okay. Can I get quick drink? Quick drink. Oh, thank you, Trevor. Why would you? Cocoa Puffs, you're eating my kind. How could you? How could you, Avian? How could you do this to me? How could you do this to me? Just sitting here, just like so offended. How could you? How could you? Trust me, I eat weird combinations of stuff too, so I am not gonna judge because I eat weird combinations too. Okay. Alrighty. I just sent out a quick message to see if anybody else wants to join us in our good times. But the voice is still hanging in there. We're doing good. Yes. Just laundry noises, just clothes just going woof, woof, woof in the background. And me yelling at my cat as he knocks over the laundry bin. Boy, oh boy. Good folly. Good folly. Good times. Yay, boys. You're going to be strong and mighty and you will not feel me. Yay. Oh, hold on. Couple more things. Super quick before I jump back in. Real quick. Okay. I think I've sent all the feelers I can. And whoever joins will join. That will be how life works. That will be how it goes. Okay. Chapter 4. It's funny, I've noticed the last few chapters have all started with Martin saying something. All of them start with Martin! That is very true, and that would be an honest goal for him. Being like, pay attention to me, love me. Well, who? Martin asked in exasperation, flicking through the sheets of paper with the candidates' details written on them. He'd only been the Baron's secretary for 5 years, and so knew nothing of Will's history. He realized now that there was no family name on the boy's papers, and assuming he had let this mistake slip past, he was annoyed at himself. "What's your family name, boy?" he said severely. Will looked at him, hesitating, hating this moment. I don't have, he began, but mercifully the Baron interceded. "Will is a special case, Martin." Well, it all started with Martin. That's like the secret to this book story. The hero of the story is actually Martin. You just don't know it yet. Martin's actually our hero who's going to save us all. He said quietly, his look telling the secretary to let the matter go. He turned back to Will, smiling encouragement. "What school do you wish to apply for, Will?" he asked. "Battle school, please, my lord," Will replied, trying to sound confident in his choice. The Baron allowed a frown to crease his forehead, and Will felt his hopes sinking. "Battle school, Will? You don't think you're a little on the small side?" the Baron asked gently. Will bit his lip. He had all but convinced himself that if he wanted this badly enough, If he believed in himself strongly enough, he would be accepted, in spite of his obvious shortcomings. I haven't had my growing spurt yet, sir, he said desperately. Everybody says that. The Baron rubbed his bearded chin with thumb and forefinger as he considered the boy before him. He glanced at his battlemaster. Rodney, he said. The tall knight stepped forward, studied Will for a moment or two, then slowly shook his head. I'm afraid he's too small, my lord, he said. Will felt a cold hand clutch his heart. I'm stronger than I look, sir, he said, but the battlemaster was unswayed by his plea. He glanced at the Baron, obviously not enjoying the situation, and shook his head. Any second choice, Will? The Baron asked. His voice was gentle, even concerned. Will hesitated for a long moment. He had never considered any other selection. Horse school, sir? He asked finally. Horse school trained and cared for the mighty battle horses that the castle knights rode. It was at least a link to battle school, Will thought. But Ulf the horsemaster was shaking his head already, even before the Baron asked his opinion. I need apprentices, my lord, he said, but this one's too small. He'd never control one of my battle horses. They'd stomp him into the ground as soon as look at him. Will could only see the Baron through a watery blur now. He fought desperately to keep the tears from sliding down his cheeks. That would be the ultimate humiliation. To be rejected from battle school and then to break down and cry like a baby in front of the Baron, all the craftmasters, and his ward mates. Can you not knock over your little perch, please? Sorry, hold on. Okay, once again, like you said, cat is doing things. Can you not knock that over? Oh, there you are. Hi. I'll open it up just a bit for you. There you go. Hi. Hi. Okay. Back to business. Okay. Martin yelling at the cat. Get off that! You're breaking everything! Okay, where did I leave off? Okay. What skills do you have, Will? The Baron was asking him. Will racked his brain. He wasn't good at lessons in languages as Alice was. He couldn't form neat, perfect letters the way George did. Nor did he have Jenny's interest in cooking. And he certainly didn't have Horace's muscles and strength. I'm a good climber, sir, he said finally, seeing that the Baron was waiting for him to say something. It was a mistake, he realized instantly. Chubb the cook glared at him angrily. He can climb all right. I remember when he climbed up a drain pipe into my kitchen and stole a tray of sweet cakes that were cooling on the windowsill. Will's jaw dropped with the unfairness of it all. That had been 2 years ago. He was a child then, and it was a mere childish prank, he wanted to say. But now the scribe master was talking too. And just this last... Oh gosh, what voice did I do for him? Shoot! See, I'm gonna forget voices super fast. And just this last spring, he climbed out up on our third-floor study and turned 2 rabbits loose during one of our legal debates. Most disruptive, absolutely. Rabbits, you say, scribe master? Said the Baron, and Nigel nodded emphatically. A male and a female rabbit, my lord, if you take my meaning, he replied. Most disruptive indeed. Unseen by Will, the very serious Lady Pauline put one elegant hand in front of her mouth. She might have been concealing a yawn, but when she removed the hand, the corners of her mouth were slightly up-tilted still. Well, yes, said the Baron. We all know... Now you're going to hear my cat in the background playing toys. Extra folly work. There's a cat loose in the parents' office. We all know how rabbits are. And as I said, my lord, it was spring. Nigel went on, in case the Baron had missed the point. Lady Pauline gave vent to an unladylike cough. The Baron looked in her direction in some surprise. I think we get the picture, Scribe Master, he said, then returned his gaze to the desperate figure who stood in front of him. Will kept his chin up and stared straight ahead. The Baron felt for the young lad in that moment. He could see the tears welling up in those lively brown eyes, held back only by an infinite determination. Willpower, he thought abstractly, recognizing the play on the boy's name. He didn't enjoy putting the boy through all this, but it had to be done. He sighed inwardly. Is there any of you who could use this boy? He said. Despite himself, Will allowed his head to turn and gaze pleadingly at the line of craftmasters, praying that one of them would relent and accept him. One by one, silently, they shook their heads. Surprisingly, it was the ranger who broke the awful silence in the room. Oh God, my favorite character. What voice do I do for my favorite character? Oh, the pressure. Oh, would you not knock things down? Would you calm down for 5 seconds and not knock everything all over the place? My goodness, cat. Jeez. But yeah, he's very gruff, and I'm just like, I'm trying to think. I'm probably going to do like 3 or 4 voices for him until I finally settle on one. There is something you should know about this boy, my lord, he said. Will had never heard Halt speak before. His voice was deep and soft-spoken, with the slightest burr of a Hibernian accent still noticeable. He stepped forward now and handed the Baron a sheet of paper, folded double. Errol unfolded it, studied the words written there, and frowned. You're sure of this, Halt, he said. Indeed, my lord. No, not that kind of accent. Ugh. Like I said, I'll probably do 4 or 5 before I finally settle on it. The Baron carefully refolded the paper and placed it on his desk. He drummed his fingers thoughtfully on the desktop, then said, I'll have to think on this overnight. Halt nodded and stepped back, seeming to fade into the background as he did so. Will stared anxiously at him, wondering what information the mysterious figure had passed on to the Baron. Like most people, Will had grown up believing that rangers were people who were best avoided. They were a secretive, arcane group, shrouded in mystery and uncertainty, and that uncertainty led to fear. Will didn't like the thought that Halt knew something about him, something that he felt was important enough to bring to the Baron's attention today of all days. The sheet of paper lay there, tantalizingly close, yet impossibly far away. He realized that there was movement around him, and the Baron was speaking to the other people in the room. Congratulations to those of you who were selected here today. It's a big day for all of you, so you're free to have the rest of the day off and enjoy yourselves. The kitchens will provide a banquet for you in your quarters, and for the rest of the day you have free run of the castle and the village. Tomorrow you'll report to your new craftmasters first thing in the morning. And if you'll take a tip from me, you'll make sure you're on time. He smiled at the other 4, then addressed Will, with a hint of sympathy in his voice. Will, I'll let you know tomorrow what I've decided about you. He turned to Martin and gestured for him to show the new apprentices out. Thank you, everyone, he said, and left the room through the door behind his desk. Yeah, he needs like a thicker, gruff voice and a thick accent. The craftmasters followed his lead. Then Martin ushered the former wards to the door. They chatted together excitedly, relieved and delighted that they had been selected by the craft masters of their choice. Will hung back behind the others, hesitating as he passed the desk where that sheet of paper still lay. He stared at it for a moment, as if somehow he could see through the words written on the reverse side. Then he felt that same sensation that he had felt earlier, that someone was watching him. He looked up and found himself staring into the dark eyes of the ranger, who remained behind the Baron's high-backed chair, almost invisible in that strange cloak of his. Will shuddered in a sudden frisson of fear and hurried out of the room. Okay, now we need new sound effects. Yay! Night, night, night. Night, noise, night. Night, night, night. We need night sounds. Night sounds. We need night sounds. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. I'm not gonna use this one. And I got no privacy. That's a good song. That's a good song. Good song. I always feel like somebody's watching me, and I got no privacy. I really like this one, but I want to add to it. No, that's too much. Okay, don't ASMR whisper at me. Don't you do that. Yes. Yes, I remember those commercials. What was up with that? Yeah, that's knocked over because you knocked it over, silly poo. That's on the floor because of you. Yeah. Do you want me to come fix it? Yeah, these two together will work. Okay, hold on. I'm going to go fix my cat's thing again, and I'll come right back. Honey, how come you're knocking over? Why do you keep knocking things over? What you doing? What you doing? Why are you knocking it down? Sure, you don't need to. Oh, watch out. Watch your face. It's not the most stable thing in the world, though, is it? Okay. There you go, buddy. Okay. And we're back. Okay. Okay. Oh, those were funny too. They've had so many good ones over the years. So many fun commercials. I'll have to look into that. I don't have a copy of that, but I'll look into it. Okay, anyway. Chapter 5. It was long after midnight. The flickering torches around the castle yard, already replaced once, had begun to burn low again. Will had watched patiently for hours, waiting for this moment, when the light was uncertain and the guards were yawning in the last hour of their shift. The day had been one of the worst he could remember. While his yearmates celebrated, enjoying their feast and then spending their time in light-hearted horseplay through the castle and the village, Will had slipped away to the silence of the forest, a kilometer or so from the castle walls. There, in the dim green coolness beneath the trees, he had spent the afternoon reflecting bitterly on the events of the choosing, nursing the deep pain of disappointment and wondering what the ranger's paper said. As the long day wore out and the shadows began to lengthen in the open fields beside the forest, he had come to a decision. He had to know what was on that paper, and he had to know tonight. Once night fell, he made his way back to the castle, avoiding villagers and castle folk alike, and secreted himself in the branches of the fig tree again. On the way, he slipped unnoticed into the kitchens and helped himself to bread, cheese, and an apple. He munched moodily on these, barely tasting them as the evening passed, and the castle began to settle down for the night. He observed the movements of the guards, getting a feeling for their timing as they went on their regular rounds. In addition to the guard troop, there was a sergeant on duty at the doorway of the tower that led to Baron Errold's quarters. But he was overweight and sleepy, and there was little chance that he would pose a risk to Will. After all, he had no intention of using the door or the stairway. Over the years, his insatiable curiosity and a penchant for going places where he wasn't supposed to had developed within him the skill of moving across seemingly open spaces without being seen. As the wind stirred the upper branches of the trees, they created moving patterns in the moonlight, patterns that Will now used to great effect. He instinctively matched his movements to the rhythm of the trees, blending easily into the pattern of the yard, becoming part of it, and so being concealed by it. In a way, cover made his task a little easier. The fat sergeant didn't expect anyone to be moving across the open space of the yard, so, not expecting to see anyone, he failed to do so. Breathless, Will flattened himself against the rough stone of the tower wall. The sergeant was barely 5 meters away, and Will could hear his heavy breathing, but a small buttress in the wall hid him from the man's sight. He studied the wall in front of him, craning back to look up. The Baron's office window was a long way up, and farther around the tower. To reach it, he would have to climb up, then work his way across the face of the wall to a spot beyond the point where the sergeant stood guard, then up again to the window. He licked his lips nervously. Unlike the smooth inner walls of the tower, the huge blocks of stone that comprised the tower's outer wall had large gaps between them. Climbing would be no problem. He'd have plenty of foot and hand holds all the way up. In some places, the stone would have been worn smoothly by the weather over the years he knew, and he'd have to go carefully. But he had climbed all the other 3 towers at some time in the past, and he expected no real difficulty with this one. But this time, if he were seen, he wouldn't be able to pass it off as a prank. He would be climbing, in the middle of the night, to a part of the castle where he had no right to be. After all, the Baron didn't post guards on this tower for the fun of it. People were supposed to stay away unless they had business here. He rubbed his hands together nervously. What could they do to him? He had already been passed over in the choosing. Nobody wanted him. He was condemned to a life in the fields anyway. What could be worse than that? But there was a nagging doubt at the back of his mind. He wasn't absolutely sure that he was condemned to that life. A faint spark of hope still remained. Perhaps the Baron would relent. Perhaps if Will pleaded with him in the morning and explained about his father and how important it was for him to be accepted for battle school, there was a very faint chance that his wish would be granted. And then, once he was accepted, eagerness and dedication would make him a worthy student, until his growing spurt happened. On the other hand, If he were caught in the next few minutes, not even that small chance would remain. He had no idea what they would do to him if he were caught, but he could be reasonably sure that it wouldn't involve being accepted into battle school. He hesitated, needing some slight extra push to get him going. It was the fat sergeant who provided it. Will heard the heavy intake of breath, the shuffling of the man's studded boots against the flagstones as he gathered his equipment together, and he realized that the sergeant was about to make one of his irregular circuits of his beat. Usually, this entailed going a few meters around the tower to either side of the doorway, then returning to his original position. It was more for the purpose of staying awake than anything else, but Will realized that it would bring them face to face within the next few seconds if he didn't do something. Quickly, easily, he began to swarm up the wall. He made the first 5 meters in a matter of seconds, spread out against the rough stone like a giant four-legged spider. Then, hearing the heavy footsteps directly below him, he froze, clinging to the wall in case some slight noise might alert the sentry. In fact, it seemed that the sergeant had heard something. He paused directly below the point where Will clung, peering into the night, trying to see past the dappled moving shadows cast by the moon and the swaying trees. But as Will had thought the night before, people seldom look up. The sergeant, eventually satisfied that he had heard nothing significant, continued to march slowly around the tower. That was the chance Will needed. It also gave him the opportunity to move across the tower face so that he was directly below the window he wanted. Hands and feet finding purchase easily, he moved almost as fast as a man could walk, all the time going higher and higher up the tower wall. At one point, he looked down, and that was a mistake. Despite his good head for heights, his vision swam slightly as he saw how far he had come, and how far below him the hard flagstones of the castle yard were. The sergeant was coming back into view, a tiny figure when seen from this height. Will blinked the moment of vertigo away, and continued to climb, perhaps a little more slowly and with a little more care than before. There was a heart-stopping moment when, stretching his right foot to the next foothold, his left boot slipped on the weather-rounded edge of the massive building blocks, and he was left clinging by his hands alone as he desperately scrambled for a foothold. Then he recovered, and he kept moving. He felt a surge of relief as his hands finally closed over the stone window ledge, and he heaved himself up and into the room, swinging his legs over the sill and dropping lightly inside. The Baron's office was deserted, of course. The 3/4 moon streamed light in through the big window. And there, on the desk where the Baron had left it, was the single sheet of paper that held the answer to Will's future. Nervously, he glanced around the room. The Baron's huge, high-backed chair stood like a sentry behind the desk. The few other pieces of furniture loomed dark and motionless. On one wall, a portrait of one of the Baron's ancestors glared down at him accusingly. He shook off these fanciful thoughts and crossed quickly to the desk, his soft boots making no noise on the bare boards of the floor. The sheet of paper, bright white with the reflected moonlight, was within reach. Just look at it, read it, and go, he told himself. That was all he had to do. He stretched out a hand for it. His fingers touched it, and a hand shot out of nowhere and seized him by the wrist. Will shouted aloud in fright. His heart leapt into his mouth, and he found himself looking up into the cold eyes of Halt, the ranger. Where had he come from? Will had been sure there had been no one else in the room, and there had been no sound of a door opening. Then he remembered how the ranger could wrap himself in that strange mottled gray-green cloak of his and seem to melt into the background, blending with the shadows until he was invisible. Not that it mattered how Halt had done it. The real problem was that he had been caught. That he had caught Will here in the Baron's office. And that meant the end to all Will's hopes. Okay, now I gotta try a new voice. I gotta remember how a German accent goes. He's gruff, though. He's real gruff. Salt. No, it's like this. Salt.
Thought you might try something like this,
said the ranger in a low voice. Will, his heart pounding from the shock of the last few moments, said nothing. He hung his head in shame and despair.
Do you have anything to say?
Holt asked him, and Will shook his head, unwilling to look up and meet that dark, penetrating gaze. Holt's next words confirmed Will's worst fears.
Well, let's see what the Baron thinks about this,
he said. Please, Holt, not... Then Will stopped. There was no excuse for what he had done, and the least he could do was face his punishment like a man. Like a warrior. Like his father, he thought. Yay, you like the accent! Okay, we will keep the strange German accent for Holt. Okay. The ranger studied him for a moment. Will thought he saw a brief flicker of recognition. Then the eyes darkened once more.
What?
Holt said curtly. Will shook his head. Nothing. The ranger's grip was like iron around his wrist as he led Will out the door and onto the wide curving staircase that led up to the Baron's living quarters. The sentries at the head of the stairs looked up in surprise at the sight of the grim-faced ranger and the boy beside him. At a brief signal from Holt, they stood aside and opened the doors into the Baron's apartment. Sorry, I'm grabbing one more noise. Okay. There we go. Where did I go off? There we go. The room was brightly lit, and for a moment Will looked around in confusion. He was sure he had seen the lights go out on this floor while he waited and watched in the tree. Then he saw the heavy drapes across the window and understood. In contrast to the Baron's sparsely furnished working quarters below, this room was a comfortable cluster of settees, footstools, carpets, tapestries, and armchairs. In one of these, Baron Errold sat, reading through a pile of reports. He looked up from the page he was holding as Holt entered with his captive.
So you were right,
said the Baron, and Holt nodded.
Just as I said, my lord. Came across the castle yard like a shadow. Dodged the sentry as if he wasn't there. As if he wasn't there, and came up the tower wall like a spider.
The Baron set the report down on the side table and leaned forward. He climbed the tower, you say? He said, a trifle incredulous.
No rope. No ladder, my lord. Climbed it as easily as you get on your horse in the morning. Easier, in fact,
Holt said, with just a ghost of a smile. The Baron frowned. He was a little overweight, and sometimes he needed help getting on his horse after a late night. He obviously wasn't amused by Holt's reminding him of that fact.
Well now, he said, looking sternly at Will. This is a serious matter.
Will said nothing. He wasn't sure if he should agree or disagree. Either course had its dangers. But he wished Holt hadn't put the Baron in a bad mood by referring to his weight. It certainly wouldn't make things any better for him.
So what shall we do with you, young Will?
The Baron continued. He rose from his chair and began to pace. Will looked up at him, trying to gauge his mood. The strong, bearded face told him nothing. Pacing and fingered his beard thoughtfully.
Tell me, young Will,
he said, facing away from the miserable boy.
What would you do in my place? What would you do with a boy who broke into your office in the middle of the night and tried to steal an important document?
I wasn't stealing, my lord. The denial burst from Will before he could contain it. The Baron turned to him, one eyebrow raised in apparent disbelief. Will continued weakly. I just wanted to see it. That's all.
Perhaps so, said the Baron, that eyebrow still raised. But you haven't answered my question. What would you do in my place?
Will hung his head again. He could plead. He could apologize. He could ask for mercy. He could try to explain. But then he squared his shoulders and came to a decision. He had known the consequences of being caught, and he had chosen to take the risk. He had no right now to plead for forgiveness. "My lord," he said hesitantly, knowing that this was a decisive moment in his life. The Baron regarded him, still half turned from the window. "Yes," he said, and Will somehow found the resolve to go on. "My lord, I don't know what I'd do in your place. I do know there is no excuse for my actions, and I will accept whatever punishment you decide." As he spoke, he raised his face to look the Baron in the eye, and in doing so, he caught the Baron's quick glance to halt. There was something in that glance he saw. Strangely, it was almost a look of approval or agreement. Then it was gone. "Any suggestions, Halt?" the Baron asked in a carefully neutral tone. Will looked at the ranger now. His face was stern, as it always was. The grizzled gray beard and short hair made him seem even more disapproving, more ominous.
"Perhaps we should show him the paper he was so keen to see, my lord,"
he said, producing a single sheet from inside his sleeve. The Baron allowed a smile to break through.
"Not a bad idea," he said. "I suppose, in a way, it does spell out his punishment, doesn't it?"
Will glanced from one man to the other. There was something going on here that he didn't understand. The Baron seemed to think that what he had just said was rather amusing. Halt, on the other hand, wasn't sharing in the fun.
"If you say so, my lord,"
he replied evenly. The Baron waved a hand at him impatiently. "Take a joke, Halt, take a joke. Well, go on and show him the paper." The ranger crossed the room and handed Will the sheet he had risked so much to see. His hand trembled as he took it. His punishment? But how had the Baron known he would deserve punishment before the actual event? He realized that the Baron was watching him expectantly. Halt as ever was an impassive statue. Will unfolded the sheet and read the words Halt had written there.
"The boy Will has the potential to be a..."
Try that again.
"The boy Will has the potential to be trained as a ranger. I will accept him as my apprentice."
Yay, that's the end of chapter 5! Yay! Oh, goodness. Goodness gravy gracious.
Okay.
What you guys think of that one? And I'm sorry with that one part. I had to read it like a jump scare. It was too perfect. It's like, he reached out, he touched it, and then bam, your castle. Oh, it's all good, bro. Thank you for joining us for as long as you did. This has been fun. I really enjoyed it. Goodness. Thank you. I'm glad you're good. It's been really fun. Again, I like doing this just because, first of all, I love these books. And so I love being able to read them to other people and to share with them how good I think they are. But then again, like in the same beat, I like doing it because it gives me practice with cold reading and with doing audiobooks and being able to create character voices kind of on the fly. And so I find it a good training exercise for me. And so I really genuinely enjoy doing it, and I hope to keep doing it. If people seem to enjoy me doing it, I'd like to continue doing it. Excuse me. Oh, thank you. Again, I'm glad you appreciate it, and I'm glad you like it. And that really is encouraging to me to know that I'm actually doing a decent job. I'm sorry, excuse me. Yeah, you too, bro. Have a good night's sleep. Oh, before you take off, I don't know if you've already left. Would you want us? Do you mind if we keep going, or would you rather we stop for now so that we can pick it up again later? And you may already be gone. I don't know. I'm just going to stare at the crackling flames in this video for just a few seconds. But yeah, Avion, there are random bird noises in that other video that some of them I was just like reading and it would come across and I'm like, wait, what's that? So I'm glad you recognized that sound. I was just like, what's that noise? Okay, sounds good. Again, we may read 1 or 2 more chapters. I don't know how much farther I'll go. I mean, we're obviously all the way up to chapter 6. So I may get to chapter 7 or chapter 8 before I call it quits. And yeah, I'll probably go ahead and leave this stream alone. For now, again, I hope whenever I do this again next time that it'll be a little bit cleaner. There won't be too many gaps. And then I might go back through, like I did with my Let's Play I did a little while ago with like those little horror games. And I may put timestamps in, like, this is where the prologue was, this is where chapter 1 was, and chapter 2 and chapter 3. Farther forward, you'd be able to find the spot where we picked up with the next chapter. So I'll probably go ahead and do that after we're done. And maybe not tonight, I may do it tomorrow. But yeah, I won't delete this. This will stay. Yep. Good night, dude. Let's see if I have. I don't. Okay, there we go. Alrighty. Okay. Avian, Tam, my darling, are you still with us? Are you still here in the chat with us? Are you still alive, darling? Are you still there? My skin itches. Okay. Let's see. I may go on again, do 1 or 2 more chapters, and then I'll probably be done for the evening. Mainly because I don't want to strain my voice too much. And I don't want to, like, go too late into the night and stuff. But we'll keep going a little bit farther. Okay. Sure. I'll go ahead and just assume we're going to continue. There we go. Hey, Dylan, just a second. Okay. Alrighty. Come on, voice. 2 more chapters and then we'll be done. There we go. Okay. Chapter 6. Will stared at the words in the paper in utter confusion. His first reaction was one of relief. He wasn't to be condemned to a lifetime of farm work, and he wasn't to be punished for his actions in the Baron's study. Then that initial sense of relief gave way to a sudden nagging doubt. He knew nothing about rangers beyond myth and superstition. He knew nothing about Halt, apart from the fact that the grim gray-cloaked figure had made him feel nervous whenever he was around. Now it seemed he was being assigned to spend all of his time with him, and he wasn't sure he liked that idea. He looked up at the 2 men. The Baron, he could see, was smiling expectantly. Apparently, he felt that Will should greet his decision as good news. He couldn't see Halt's face clearly. The deep cowl of his cloak left his face in shadow. The Baron's smile faded slightly. He appeared a little puzzled by Will's reaction to the news, or rather, his lack of any visible reaction.
"Well, what do you say, Will?" he asked in an encouraging tone.
Will drew a deep breath.
"Thank you, sir, my lord," he said uncertainly. What if the Baron's earlier joke about the note containing his punishment was more serious than he thought? Maybe being assigned to be Halt's apprentice was the worst punishment he could have chosen. But the Baron certainly didn't look as if he thought so. He seemed to be very pleased with the idea, and Will knew he wasn't an unkind man. The Baron gave a little sigh of pleasure as he lowered himself into an armchair. He looked up at the ranger and gestured toward the door. "Perhaps you might give us a few moments alone, Halt. I'd like to have a word with Will in private," he said. The ranger bowed gravely. "Certainly, my lord," he said, the voice coming from deep inside the cowl. He moved, silently as ever, past Will and out through the door that led to the corridor outside. The door closed behind him with barely a sound, and Will shivered. The man was uncanny. "Sit down, Will." The Baron gestured to one of the low armchairs facing his own. Will sat nervously on the edge of it, as if poised for flight. The Baron noted his body language and sighed. "You don't seem very pleased with my decision," he said, sounding disappointed. The reaction puzzled Will. He wouldn't have thought a powerful figure like the Baron would care one way or another what an insignificant ward would think about his decisions. He didn't know how to answer, so he sat in silence, until finally the Baron continued. "Would you prefer to work as a farmhand?" he asked. He couldn't believe that a lively, energetic boy like this could possibly prefer such a dull, uneventful life. But maybe he was wrong. Will hurriedly reassured him on that score. "No, sir," he said hastily. The Baron made a small questioning gesture with his hands. "Well then, would you prefer that I punish you somehow for what you've done?" Will started to speak, then realized that his answer might be insulting and stopped. The Baron gestured for him to continue. "It's just that I'm not sure you haven't, sir," he said. Then, noticing the frown that creased the Baron's forehead as he said the words, he hurried on. I don't know much about rangers, sir, and people say..." He let the words trail off,
It was obvious that the Baron held Halt in some esteem, and Will didn't think it was it was politic for him to point out that ordinary people feared rangers and thought they were warlocks. He saw that the Baron was nodding, and a look of understanding had replaced the perplexed expression he had been wearing.
Of course. People say they're black magicians, don't they?
He agreed, and Will nodded, not even realized he was doing so.
Tell me, Will, do you find Halt to be a frightening person?
No, sir, Will said hastily. Then, as the Baron held his gaze, he reluctantly added, well, maybe a little bit. The Baron leaned back, steepling his fingers together. Now that he understood the reasons for the boy's reluctance, he berated himself mentally for not foreseeing them. After all, he had a better knowledge of the Ranger Corps than he could expect of a young boy, just turned 15, who was subjected to the usual superstitious mutterings of the castle staff.
They're a mysterious group of people, he said, but there's nothing about them to be frightened of. Unless you're an enemy of the kingdom.
He could see that the boy was hanging on his every word, and he added jokingly,
You're not an enemy of the kingdom, are you, Will?
No, sir, Will said in sudden fright. And the Baron sighed again. He hated it when people didn't realize he was joking. Unfortunately, as overlord of the castle, his words were treated with great seriousness by most people. Sorry, excuse me. By most people.
All right, he said reassuringly. I know you're not. But believe me, I thought you'd be glad of this appointment. An adventurous lad like you should take to life as a ranger like a duck to water. It's a big opportunity for you, Will.
He paused, studying the boy closely, seeing that he was still uncertain about the whole matter.
Very few boys are chosen to be rangers' apprentices, you know. The opportunity only comes up on rare occasions.
Will nodded, but he still wasn't totally convinced. He thought he owed it to his dream to have one last attempt at battle school. After all, the Baron did seem to be in an uncommonly good mood this evening, in spite of the fact that Will had broken into his office. I wanted to be a warrior, sir, he said tentatively, but the Baron shook his head immediately.
I'm afraid your talents lie in other directions. Halt knew that when he first saw you. That's why he asked for you.
Oh, said Will. There wasn't much else he could say. He felt he should be reassured by all that the Baron had said, and to a certain degree he was. But there was still so much uncertainty to it all, he thought. It's just that Halt seems to be so grim all the time, he said.
He certainly doesn't have my sparkling sense of humor, the Baron agreed.
Then, as Will looked blankly at him, he muttered something under his breath. Will wasn't sure what he'd done to upset him, so he thought it best to change the subject. But what does a ranger actually do, my lord? He asked. Once again, the Baron shook his head.
That's for Halt to tell you himself. They're a quirky group, and they don't like other people talking about them too much. Now perhaps you should go back to your quarters and try to get some sleep. You're to report to Halt's cottage at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, my lord, Will said, rising from his uncomfortable perch on the edge of the chair. He wasn't sure if he was going to enjoy life as a ranger's apprentice, but it appeared he had no choice in the matter. He bowed to the Baron, who nodded briefly in return. Then he turned away for the door. The Baron's voice stopped him.
Will, this time use the stairs.
Yes, my lord, he replied seriously, and was a little puzzled by the way the Baron rolled his eyes to the sky and muttered to himself again. This time he could make out a few words. About jokes, he thought. He let himself out through the door. The sentries were still on duty on the landing by the stairs. But Halt was gone. Or at least he appeared to be. With the ranger, you could never be quite certain. Okay, now, before we get into this chapter, we're going to pull up some new sounds. I think I have a good one. I gotta find it. Where did it go? Here, this one. I think this one should work. Maybe. I don't know. Let me try this one. Yeah, this is maybe a little too obnoxious. Yeah, this one's going to be a little much. No, sorry. Sorry, birds. You're getting away, birds. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find a good one to do. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the best one. I'm trying to find the best one. And this one will probably be the best. Okay. Chapter 7. It felt strange to be leaving the castle after all these years. Sean! Welcome, dude. We're still going. And no, I don't have a PS4. I kind of wish I did, but I don't. I have a PS2 and a PS3, but not a PS4. I'm sorry. I do not. Someday I might, but at this moment, I do not. Folly. Okay. Okay. All right, we'll start that over. Here we go. Okay. It felt strange to be leaving the castle after all these years. Will turned back at the bottom of the hill, his small bundle of belongings slung over his shoulder, and stared up at the massive walls. Castle Redmont dominated the landscape. Built on top of a small hill, it was a massive three-sided structure, facing roughly west, and with a tower at each of the three corners. In the center, protected by the three curtain walls, were the castle yard and the keep, a fourth tower that soared above the others and housed the Baron's official quarters and his private living apartments, along with those of his senior officers. The castle was built in ironstone, a rock that was almost indestructible, and in the low sun of early morning or late afternoon, seemed to glow with an inner red light. It was this characteristic that gave the castle its name, Redmont, or Red Mountain. At the foot of the hill and on the other side of the Tarbis River lay Wensley Village, a cheerfully haphazard cluster of houses with an inn and those craft shops necessary to meet the demands of day-to-day country life. A copper, a wheelwright, smithy, and harness maker. The land around had been cleared for some distance, both to provide farmlands for the villagers to tend and to prevent enemies from being able to approach unseen. In times of danger, the villagers would drive their flocks across the wooden bridge that spanned the Tarbis, removing the center span behind them, and seek shelter behind the massive ironstone walls of the castle, protected by the Baron's soldiers and the knights trained in Redmont's battle school. Halt's cottage lay some distance away from both castle and village, nestling under the shelter of the trees at the edge of the forest. The sun was just rising over the trees as Will made his way to the log cabin. A thin spiral of smoke was rising from the chimney, so Will reasoned that Halt was already up and about. He stepped up onto the veranda that ran the length of one side of the house, hesitated for a moment, then taking a deep breath, he knocked firmly on the door.
"Come in,"
said a voice from inside. Will opened the door and went into the cottage. It was small, but surprisingly neat and comfortable looking inside. He found himself in the main room, a comfortable living and dining area, with a small kitchen at one end, separated from the main area by a pine bench. There were comfortable chairs ranged around a fire, a well-scrubbed wooden table, and pots and pans that gleamed from much polishing. There was even a vase of brightly colored wildflowers on the mantel shelf. The sun streamed cheerfully through a large window. 2 other rooms led off the main room. Halt sat in one of the chairs, his booted feet resting on the table.
"At least you're on time,"
he said gruffly.
Have you had your breakfast yet?"
"Yes, sir," said Will, staring in fascination at the ranger. This was the first time he had ever seen Halt without his gray-green cloak and hood. Sorry, stupid. Sorry. The ranger was wearing simple brown and gray woolen clothes and soft-looking leather boots. He was older than Will had realized. His hair and beard were short and dark, but peppered with steel gray flecks. They were both roughly trimmed, and Will thought they looked as if Halt had cut them himself with his hunting knife. The ranger stood up. He was surprisingly small in build. That was something else that Will had never realized. The gray cloak had concealed a lot about Halt. And not at all tall. In fact, he was considerably shorter than average height. But there was a sense of power and whipcord strength about him, so that his lack of height and bulk didn't make him any less daunting a figure.
"Finish staring?"
asked the ranger suddenly. Will jumped nervously. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir," he said. Halt grunted. He pointed to one of the small rooms Will had noticed as he entered.
"That'll be your room. You can put your things in there."
Away to the wood stove in the kitchen area, and Will hesitantly entered the room he had indicated. It was small, but like the rest of the cottage, it was also clean and comfortable looking. A small bed lay alongside one wall. There was a wardrobe for clothes, and a rough table with a washing basin and jug on it. There was also, Will noticed, another vase of freshly picked wildflowers, adding a bright spot of color to the room. He put his small bundle of clothes and belongings on the bed, and went back into the main room. Halt was still busy by the stove, his back to Will. Will coughed apologetically to attract his attention. Halt continued to stir coffee into a pot on the stove. Will coughed again.
"Got a cold, boy?"
asked the ranger without turning around. No, sir."
"Then why are you coughing?"
asked Halt, turning around to face him. Will hesitated. "Well, sir," he began uncertainly, "I just wanted to ask you, what does a ranger actually do?"
"He doesn't ask pointless questions, boy,"
said Halt.
"He keeps his eyes and ears open, and he looks and listens, and eventually, if he hasn't gotten too much cotton wool between his ears, he listens."
"Oh," said Will. "I see." He didn't. And even though he realized that this was probably no time to ask more questions, he couldn't help himself, repeating a little rebelliously, "I just wondered what rangers do is all." Holt caught the tone in his voice and turned to him, a strange gleam in his eye.
Well then, I suppose I'd better tell you, he said. What rangers do, or more correctly, what rangers' apprentices do, is the housework.
Will had a sinking feeling as the suspicion struck him that he'd made a tactical error. The housework, he repeated. Holt nodded, looking distinctly pleased with himself.
That's right. Take a look around.
He paused, gesturing around the interior of the cabin for Will to do as he suggested, then continued.
See any servants?
No, sir, Will said slowly.
No, sir, indeed, Holt said. Because this isn't a mighty castle with a staff of servants. This is a lowly cabin, and it has water to be fetched, and firewood to be chopped, and floors to be swept, and rugs to be beaten. And who do you suppose might do all those things, boy?
That voice is hard on me now. Of course, you guys all picked the voice for Holt that makes that kills my voice. Well, it doesn't kill it. It's just more challenging. And yes, Holt is a small, but he is the most intense small to ever small. Do not misjudge Holt. He is intense, and you do not mess with him. He's small but fierce. Will tried to think of some answer other than the one which now seemed inevitable. Nothing came to mind, so he finally said in a defeated tone, "Would that be me, sir?"
"I believe it would be,"
the ranger told him, then rattled off a list of instructions crisply.
"Buckets there, barrel outside the door, water in the river, axe in the lean-to, fire behind the cabin, firewood behind the cabin, broom by the door, and I believe you can probably see where the floor might be."
"Yes, sir," said Will, beginning to roll up his sleeves. He'd noticed that the water barrel as he approached, obviously holding the day's water supply for the cabin. He estimated that it would hold 20 or 30 buckets full. With a sigh, he realized he was going to have a busy morning. As he walked outside, the empty bucket in one hand, he heard the ranger say contentedly as he poured himself a mug of coffee and sat down again.
"I'd forgotten how much fun having an apprentice can be."
Will couldn't believe that such a small and seemingly neat cottage could generate so much cleaning and general maintenance. After he had filled the water barrel with fresh river water, 31 buckets full, he chopped wood from a stack of logs behind the cabin, piling the split firewood into a neat stack. He swept out the cabin then, after Holt decided that the rug on the living room floor needed beating. He rolled it up, carried it outside, and draped it over a rope slung between two trees, beating it savagely so that clouds of dust flew from it. From time to time, Holt leaned out the window to give him encouragement, which usually consisted of curt comments such as,
"You've missed a bit on the left side,"
or
"Put some energy into it, boy."
When the rug had been replaced on the floor, Holt decided that several of his cooking pots didn't gleam with a sufficient intensity.
"We'll have to give them a bit of a scouring,"
he said, more or less to himself. Will knew by now that this translated to, "You'll have to give them a bit of a scouring." So, without a word, he took the pots to the river's edge and half filled them with water and fine sand, scouring and polishing the metal until it gleamed.
Excuse me.
Holt, meanwhile, had moved to a canvas chair on the veranda, where he sat reading through a tall pile of what looked to be official communications. Passing by once or twice, Will noticed that several of the papers bore crests and coats of arms, while the vast majority were headed with a simple oak leaf design. Yes, he does. He does very much. He does. But he's great. I love him. When Will returned from the riverbank, he held the pots up for Holt's inspection. The ranger grimaced at his distorted reflection in the bright copper surface.
"Not bad," Can see my own face in it,
he said, then added without a hint of a smile.
Might not be a good thing.
Will said nothing. With anyone else, he might have suspected it was a joke. But with Holt, you simply couldn't tell. Holt studied him for a second or two. Then his shoulders lifted slightly in a shrug, and he gestured for Will to return the pots to the kitchen. Will was halfway through the door when he heard Holt say behind him,
That's odd.
Thinking the ranger might be talking to him, Will paused at the door. I beg your pardon, he said suspiciously. Each time Holt had found a new chore for him to attend to, he had seemed to begin the instruction with a statement like,
How unusual. The living room floor is full of dust.
Or,
I do believe the stove is in dire need of a new supply of firewood.
It was an affection that Will had found more than a little annoying over the day, although Holt seemed to be quite fond of it. This time, however, it seemed that he had been genuinely musing to himself as he read through a new report. One of the oak leaf-crested ones, Will noted. Now the ranger looked up, a little surprised that Will had addressed him.
What's that?
He said. Will shrugged. Sorry, when you said that's odd, I thought you were talking to me. Holt shook his head several times, still frowning at the report in his hand.
Oh no,
he said a trifle distractedly.
I was just reading this.
His voice trailed away and he frowned thoughtfully. Will, his curiosity roused, waited expectantly.
Sorry.
What is it? He finally ventured to ask. As the ranger turned those dark eyes on him, he instantly wished he hadn't. Holt regarded him for a second or two.
Curious, are you?
He said at length, and when Will nodded uncomfortably, he went on in an unexpectedly milder tone.
Well, I suppose that's a good trait for a ranger's apprentice. After all, that's why we tested you with that paper in the Baron's office.
You tested me? Will set the heavy copper kettle down by the door. You expected me to try to see what it said? Holt nodded.
Would have been disappointed if you hadn't. Although I wanted to see how you'd go about it.
Then he held up a hand to forestall the torrent of questions that were about to tumble out of Will's mouth.
Discuss that later,
he said, glancing meaningfully at the kettle and the other pots. Will stooped to retrieve them and turned back to the house once more. But curiosity still burned in him, and he turned to the ranger again. So what does it say? He asked, nodding toward the report. Again there was a silence as Holt regarded him, perhaps assessing him. Then he said,
Lord Nordholt is dead. Apparently killed by a bear last week while out hunting.
Lord Nordholt? Will asked. The name was vaguely familiar to him, but he couldn't place it.
Former Supreme Commander of the King's Army,
Holt told him, and Will nodded, as if he had known this. But since Holt seemed to be answering his questions, he was emboldened to continue. What's so odd about it? After all, bears do kill people from time to time. Holt nodded.
True. But I would have thought Cordon 5 was a little far west for bears. And I would have thought Nordholt too experienced a hunter to go after one alone.
He shrugged as if dismissing the thought.
But then again, life is full of surprises, and people do make mistakes.
He gestured toward the kitchen again, indicating that the conversation was over.
When you've put those away, you might like to clean out the fireplace,
he said. Will moved to do as he was told. But a few minutes later, as he walked past one of the windows to the large fireplace that took up most of one wall in the living room, he glanced out to see the ranger tapping the report thoughtfully on his chin, his thoughts obviously a long way away.
Excuse me.
Okay. Excuse me. My voice is like just on the brink of starting to cave. Like it's not caving yet, but it's getting to that point where it's getting a little bit harder to do it consistently. I'm hacking like Gollum here, jeez. How long is this chapter? What do you say we maybe do one more chapter and then call it a night? Does that sound good? To you guys, does that sound good? Hold on, I need to go take care of my nose. I'll be right back. I shall return. Okay, that stuff looks better. Okay. Sure, let's do one more. One more. Okay. Chapter 8. Sometime late in the afternoon, Halt finally ran out of jobs for Will. He looked around the cabin, noting the gleaming kitchen implements, the spotless fireplace, the thoroughly swept floor, and the totally dust-free rug. A stack of firewood lay beside the fireplace, and another stack, cut and split into shorter length, filled the wicker basket beside the kitchen stove.
Not bad,
He said.
Not bad at all.
Will felt a surge of pleasure at the sparing praise, but before he could feel too pleased with himself, Halt asked,
Can you cook, boy?
Cook, sir? Will asked uncertainly. Halt raised his eyes to some unseen superior being.
Why do young people invariably answer a question with another question?
He asked. Then, receiving no reply, he continued.
Yes, cook. Prepare food so that one might eat it. Make meals. I assume you know what food is, what meals are.
Yes, Will answered, careful to take any questioning inflection out of the word.
Well, as I told you this morning, this is no grand castle. If we want to eat food here, we have to cook food here.
Halt told him. There was that word we again, Will thought. Every time so far that Halt had said we must, it had seemed to translate to mean you must. I can't cook, Will admitted, and Halt clapped his hands and rubbed them together.
Of course you can't. Most boys can't. So I'll have to show you how. Come on.
He led the way to the kitchen and introduced Will to the mysteries of cooking, peeling and chopping onions, choosing a piece of beef from the meat safe, trimming it and cutting it into neat cubes, then chopping vegetables, searing the beef in a sizzling pan, and finally adding a generous dash of red wine and some of what Halt called his secret ingredients. The result was a savory-smelling stew, simmering on the top of the stove. Now, as they waited for the dinner to be ready, they sat on the veranda in the early evening and talked quietly.
The Rangers were founded over 150 years ago, in King Herbert's vein. Do you know anything about him?
Halt looked sideways at the boy sitting beside him, tossing the question out quickly to see his response. Will hesitated. He vaguely remembered the name from history lessons in the ward, but he couldn't remember any details. Still, he decided he'd try to bluff his way through it. He didn't want to look too ignorant on his first day with his new master. Oh, yes, he said. King Herbert. We learned about him.
Really?
Said the ranger expansively.
Perhaps you could tell me a little about him?
He leaned back and crossed his legs, getting himself comfortable. Will cast about desperately in his memory, trying to remember even a shred of detail about King Herbert. He'd done something. But what? He hesitated, pretending to gather his thoughts. The king. That much he was sure of, and he glanced at Halt to see if he could stop now. Halt merely smiled and made a rolling gesture with his hand that meant, go on. He was the king 150 years ago, Will said, trying to sound certain of his facts. The ranger smiled at him, gesturing for him to continue yet again. Well, I seem to recall that he was the one who founded the Ranger Corps, he said hopefully, and Halt raised his eyebrows in mock surprise.
Really?